The autumn wind carried the scent of burning leaves through Wickfield Square, but tonight it would carry something else entirely: the acrid smell of regret and the bitter taste of consequences yet to come. 5 students stood in the orange glow of streetlights, their voices raised not in celebration, but in fury. The new state education mandate had stripped their university of funding, their professors of tenure, their futures of certainty. They were angry, and anger needed a target. "This whole town thinks they're so pure," Amber Martinez spat, her dark hair whipping across her face as she gestured toward the statue that had stood sentinel in the square since 1954. "Look at their precious symbol, standing there judging us while they vote away our education." The Virgin Mary statue rose 12 feet from its marble pedestal, her stone robes painted the softest blue, her hands outstretched in eternal blessing. Her face, weathered by decades of rain and wind, still held an expression of infinite compassion. Tonight, that compassion would be tested. "It's just concrete and paint," Liam Chen said, though his voice held less conviction than his words. The red gaskin felt heavy in his hands, heavier than it should have been. A symbol of oppression disguised as love. Sierra Walsh had her phone out, already streaming to her followers. "We're here to show this town what real change looks like," she announced to a camera, her voice artificially bright. "Time to tear down the old and make way for the new." Cody Rodriguez set up his professional streaming equipment, the kind he used for gaming videos. This would get more views than anything he'd ever posted. Going live in 3, 2. Jess Thompson was already moving to the music playing from her portable speaker, her movements sharp and aggressive. Let's give them a show they'll never forget. Only Miguel Santos, a local student who'd grown up seeing this statue every day of his life, stood apart from the group. "Guys, this isn't right," he called out. "You don't know what this means to people here. My grandmother..." "Your grandmother needs to join the 21st century," Amber cut him off, snatching the lighter from her pocket. The gasoline poured from Liam's can in a steady stream, soaking into the stone base, pooling on the ground. The fumes rose, making them all dizzy. Or maybe that was just the adrenaline. "Say goodbye to your precious virgin," Amber laughed, but the sound was hollow, forced. She flicked the Zippo. The flame caught instantly, racing up the stone in tongues of orange and blue. The paint began to bubble and peel. The statue's serene expression seemed to shift in the dancing light. Or perhaps that was just the heat waves distorting their vision. Sierra danced closer to the flames, Jess recording her every move. "This is what liberation looks like," she shouted over the crackling fire. But as the flames rose higher, something changed. The laughter died in their throats. The painted eyes of the statue, softened by heat, seemed to weep tears of molten color. And for just a moment, just one impossible moment, they all heard it. A sound like crying, like mourning, like a mother watching her children destroy themselves. Miguel was the first to step back, his hands pressed to his ears. But the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from within, from some place in their souls they'd forgotten existed. The fire burned for hours, but the real burning had only just begun. To understand what the students had done, you had to know the story of why the statue stood there at all. November 15th, 1954. The Wickfield mine collapse. 43 men went down that Tuesday morning. Only one came back up. For 3 days, the women of Wickfield gathered in the square, holding vigil. They prayed in English and Spanish, in Polish and Italian, all the languages that had built this small mining town. Maria Santos, Miguel's great-grandmother, led them in the rosary each hour, her voice never faltering even as hope grew thin. On the third night, when the rescue teams had all but given up, Tommy Kowalski emerged from the rubble. He was the youngest of the trapped miners, barely 22, and he was delirious from dehydration and trauma. But his story never changed, not in the 68 years that followed, not even on his deathbed last spring. "She walked through the fire," he told them, his eyes wide with wonder and fear. "Through the flames and falling timber like it was nothing. A woman in blue robes, glowing like moonlight. She took my hand and led me to an air pocket, then to a passage I'd never seen before. "Wait here," she told me. "Help is coming." And then she was gone. The women didn't need to be told who she was. They'd been calling on her for 3 days. By Christmas of that year, they'd raised enough money for the statue. It wasn't fancy. Local artist Maria Esperanza carved it from Indiana limestone and painted it herself, working by candlelight in her garage through the winter months. But when they unveiled it on Easter morning 1955, something settled over Wickfield. A sense of protection, of presence. The statue weathered storms that flattened other towns. During the flood of '78, when the river rose 15 feet, the water stopped just inches from her pedestal. In the tornado of '93, a trailer was lifted and set down gently in the square, its family of 4 inside unharmed, while the funnel seemed to split and pass around the statue on either side. People began leaving flowers, lighting candles, whispering prayers. Not worship, the townspeople were careful about that, but reverence, gratitude, love. The statue became the heart of Wickfield. Every major decision, every town meeting, every moment of crisis brought people to the square. When the mine finally closed in 1987, they held the memorial service at her feet. When the high school won the state championship in 2010, they celebrated in her shadow. When COVID hit in 2020, they strung lights around her like a beacon of hope. She was more than stone and paint. She was their mother, their protector, their reminder that some things endure. Until 5 angry students decided she was just concrete. The morning after brought an unnatural quiet to Wickfield. The kind of silence that comes after something sacred has been broken. The fire department had extinguished the flames by dawn, but the damage was complete. The statue's face was blackened and cracked, her painted robes scorched to bare stone. Her outstretched hands had crumbled away entirely. Only her eyes remained intact, 2 spots of faded blue paint that seemed to follow you as you walked around the ruined pedestal. The students woke in their dorms and apartments with hangovers that had nothing to do with alcohol. They'd celebrated their victory the night before with cheap beer and cheaper bravado, but now, in the grey morning light streaming through their windows, something felt wrong. Amber was the first to notice. She reached for her phone to check the video Sierra had posted, but the screen remained black no matter how many times she pressed the power button. The device wasn't dead. It was warm to the touch, almost hot. But it wouldn't turn on. Across town, Liam was having the same problem. His phone, his laptop, his tablet, nothing with a screen would work. He called the tech support line from his landline, but after 20 minutes on hold, he gave up. There were more important things to worry about, like the smell. It had started the moment he opened his eyes. Gasoline fumes, so strong they made his eyes water. But there was no gas can in his apartment, no source for the smell. He'd showered twice, brushed his teeth until his gums bled, even changed his sheets. The smell remained, clinging to him like guilt made manifest. Sierra found that her video had vanished from every platform. Not deleted, vanished, as if it had never existed. Her followers swore they'd never seen it. The streaming platforms had no record of it. Even her own phone showed no evidence that she'd ever been in the square that night. But she remembered. They all remembered. Cody's equipment, thousands of dollars worth of cameras and streaming gear, had simply stopped working. Everything powered on, all the lights blinked green, but no image would record. No sound would capture. It was as if reality itself was refusing to be documented in his presence. Jess couldn't listen to music anymore. Every song, regardless of genre or platform, would fade after a few seconds into the same haunting melody. A hymn she didn't recognize, sung by a voice so beautiful it made her weep, and so sad it made her want to disappear. Only Miguel seemed unaffected, but he felt the weight of what had happened more than any of them. He'd grown up with stories of the statue's power, had seen his grandmother leave flowers at her feet every week for 20 years. He'd tried to stop them, but not hard enough. Not when it mattered. 3 days after the burning, Amber Martinez stopped being able to see her own reflection. It started small, a glitch in her bathroom mirror that she blamed on poor lighting. But by Thursday, she couldn't see herself in any reflective surface. Not mirrors, not windows, not the screen of her finally working phone. Everyone else appeared normally, but where Amber should have been, there was only empty space. She tried to convince herself it was psychological, guilt manifesting as self-erasure. But Thursday night, alone in her dorm room, she learned the truth was far stranger. The bathroom light flickered out while she was washing her face. In the darkness, she heard water dripping, not from the faucet she'd just turned off, but from somewhere else, somewhere above her. A blue glow began to emanate from behind her, reflected in the mirror she couldn't see herself in. Slowly, she turned around. The Virgin Mary stood in her tiny dorm bathroom, exactly as she had been before the fire. Robes of perfect blue, hands outstretched, face full of infinite compassion and infinite sorrow. The light came from within her, soft and warm, like moonlight through stained glass. But she was crying, tears of real water that fell to the tile floor with soft, rhythmic drops. "Would you laugh if it were your mother burning?" The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, gentle as a lullaby, terrible as judgment. Amber tried to speak, but her voice had abandoned her. She tried to move, but her feet were rooted to the floor. She could only stand there, facing the presence she had mocked, feeling something inside her chest crack and crumble like heated stone. "You lit the fire that burned away 68 years of love," the Virgin said, her tears falling steadily. "Now you burn away from yourself, one reflection at a time, until you remember who you truly are." The vision faded, but the smell remained. Not gasoline anymore, but smoke. Constant, clinging smoke that followed Amber everywhere, that she tasted with every breath, that reminded her with every inhalation of the moment she'd chosen destruction over reverence. She stopped going to classes, stopped eating in the cafeteria where people might notice her missing reflection in the serving line sneeze guards, stopped living in any meaningful way, haunted by the image of those tears falling in her bathroom and the question that echoed in her dreams. Would you laugh if it were your mother burning? Liam Chen's car had always been his sanctuary. A 2018 Honda Civic he'd bought himself, detailed every weekend, the one place in the world that was entirely his. Until the night it became his prison. He was driving home from his evening shift at the campus bookstore when the rain started. Not unusual for October, but this was different. Heavy, driving rain that seemed to come from all directions at once. He pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner to wait it out. That's when the doors stopped working. Not mechanically, the handles moved, the locks clicked, everything functioned perfectly. But the doors wouldn't open. It was as if they were sealed shut by some invisible force. The windows wouldn't roll down either, despite the electrical systems working normally. Panic set in quickly. Liam pounded on the glass, honked the horn, flashed the lights. But the diner was empty, the parking lot deserted, and the rain was getting heavier. Through the fogged windshield, blurred by condensation and rainfall, he saw her. A figure in blue walking across the parking lot, barefoot on the wet asphalt. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if the driving rain were nothing more than a gentle mist. As she drew closer, Liam could see that she cast no reflection in the puddles beneath her feet. She stopped directly in front of his car, and despite the fogged glass and heavy rain, he could see her face clearly. The same face that had gazed down benevolently from the statue, now marked with profound sadness. 3 gentle knocks on his windshield. Knock, knock, knock. "You fed the fire." Her voice came clearly through the sealed car, as if she were sitting in the passenger seat beside him. "Now, live inside it." The interior of the car began to fill with the smell of gasoline, so strong it burned his nostrils and throat. But there was something else. The sound of crackling flames, growing louder and more real with each second. Liam looked down to see tongues of fire licking at his shoes, climbing up the car seats, dancing across the dashboard. But he felt no heat, only the terror of being trapped in his own private hell. "Please," he whispered, the first prayer he'd spoken since childhood. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The flames vanished. The rain stopped. The doors clicked open. But every night after that, when Liam tried to sleep, he found himself back in that car. Back in the rain, back watching her walk across the parking lot to deliver her terrible, gentle justice. And every morning he woke with the taste of gasoline in his mouth and the sound of her knocks echoing in his ears. Sierra Walsh had built her entire identity around being heard. 15,000 followers on TikTok, 23,000 on Instagram, a voice that could cut through any crowd, any conversation, any room. Until the night, her voice simply stopped mattering. It started with her computer. She'd sit down to edit videos, and the keyboard would begin typing on its own. Restore what you took. Restore what you took. Restore what you took. Over and over, filling document after document with the same 4 words until she'd slammed the laptop shut in frustration. But the real horror was subtler and far more devastating. People stopped listening to her. Not couldn't hear her. She wasn't mute. But her words seemed to slide off people like water off glass. She'd speak, and conversations would continue around her as if she hadn't said anything at all. She'd raise her voice, and people would look through her, past her, anywhere but at her. At first, she thought it was coincidence, then paranoia, then desperation. She tried everything: new haircuts, brighter clothes, more outrageous opinions. She screamed in the middle of the library, danced naked through the quad at midnight, even set a small trash can on fire behind the science building. Nothing. No reaction, no recognition, no acknowledgement that she existed at all. A week after the burning, Sierra found herself back in Wickfield Square at 3 in the morning, standing where the statue had been. The blackened pedestal looked like a gravestone in the moonlight. "Please," she whispered to the empty air. "I just wanted to be heard. I just wanted to matter." The response came not as a voice, but as a memory that wasn't her own. She was 5 years old, lost in a church during her cousin's wedding, crying for her mother in the vast, echoing space. But in this memory that belonged to someone else, a woman in blue robes knelt beside her, took her small hands, and said, "You are heard, little one. You have always been heard." But sometimes we must be quiet to listen to the love that surrounds us. Sierra fell to her knees on the cold concrete, finally understanding. She'd had a voice all along, but she'd used it to tear down instead of build up, to mock instead of comfort, to perform instead of connect. The typing on her computer changed that night. Instead of restore what you took, it began composing apologies. Letters to every person she'd hurt with her words, every cause she'd mocked for views, every sacred thing she'd trampled for attention. She'd been given back her voice, but only to use it for healing. Cody Rodriguez had made a living out of documenting his life. Gaming streams, daily vlogs, product reviews, every moment captured, edited, uploaded for his modest but loyal following. Technology was his language, content was his currency, and going viral was his religion. Until the night his screen started showing him things that were never filmed. It began with his streaming setup automatically powering on at 3:33 a.m. every night. He'd disabled every timer, unplugged every device, even thrown circuit breakers, but somehow the monitors would flicker to life with the precision of an atomic clock. The first night, they showed the original footage, shaky phone video of the statue burning, his professional cameras capturing every angle of destruction. But as the nights passed, the footage began to change. New scenes appeared. Close-ups of the Virgin Mary's face before the fire started, her stone eyes seeming to look directly into the camera with an expression of foreknowledge and forgiveness. Shots from impossible angles, from inside the flames, from beneath the statue, from perspectives that should have been blocked by buildings or trees. But the most disturbing addition was the voice. Not Sierra's commentary or the students' laughter, but a whisper that ran underneath everything. "You wanted to be seen. Now I see you." Cody tried to delete the files, but they regenerated instantly. He replaced his hard drives, but the videos appeared on the new equipment before he'd even finished the installation. He bought an entirely new computer system, but the first thing that appeared on the fresh monitors was that same footage, now showing details he'd never noticed before. In one frame, barely visible in the background, stood a figure in blue robes watching from the edge of the square. In another, a face appeared in the flames themselves. Not burning, but present, witnessing. And in every shot, That voice whispered the same words. You wanted to be seen. Now I see you. The technical term was impossible data persistence, but Cody knew better. This wasn't a glitch or virus. This was judgment rendered in pixels and frames, consequence delivered through the very medium he'd used to document destruction. On the 10th night, something new appeared on his screens. Instead of the burning, he saw himself as a child, maybe 7 years old, kneeling in his bedroom with hands pressed together in prayer. It was a memory he'd forgotten, a night when his little sister had been sick with pneumonia and he'd prayed to anyone who would listen to make her better. The whisper changed. You wanted to be seen because you remember being loved. Remember again. His sister had recovered. And somewhere in his childhood faith, buried under years of cynicism and performance, Cody began to remember what it felt like to believe in something greater than views and likes and digital validation. Jess Thompson had always danced. Ballet at 4, jazz at 7, hip-hop in middle school, contemporary in high school, and now, at 20, she could move to any rhythm, embody any emotion, tell any story with her body in motion, until music itself turned against her. The change was subtle at first. Songs would fade out earlier than they should, leaving her mid-routine in awkward silence. Beats would shift unexpectedly, throwing off her timing. But by the end of the first week, any music she tried to dance to would dissolve into the same haunting melody. A hymn she'd never heard but somehow recognized, sung by voices that seemed to come from another century. It was beautiful and terrible, this music that followed her everywhere. Beautiful because it touched something deep in her soul. Terrible because it made her remember things she'd tried to forget. Like the little girl she'd been, dragging her mother to church every Sunday, not for God or faith or tradition, but because she loved to watch the way candlelight flickered during evening prayers, the way the stained glass windows painted rainbow patterns on the walls, the way the priest's robes moved when he walked, like dancing in slow motion. She'd danced in church once, during a children's Christmas pageant. She was supposed to be an angel, but she'd improvised, spinning and leaping with pure joy, and the congregation had wept at the sight of such innocent reverence made manifest in movement. When had she lost that joy? When had dancing become performance instead of prayer? The hymn that haunted her music grew stronger each night, until finally, alone in the studio at 2 a.m., Jess stopped fighting it. She let the melody fill her. Let her body respond, not with the sharp, aggressive movements she'd used in the square, but with something older, deeper, more honest. She danced her regret. She danced her childhood faith. She danced her sorrow for what she'd destroyed and her hope for what might be rebuilt. And as she danced, she wasn't alone. A presence filled the studio, warm and maternal and infinitely patient. Not visible, not tangible, but unmistakably there. Watching, waiting, forgiving. Then kneel, came the voice she'd been hearing in her closet at night. But now it wasn't a command. It was an invitation. Jess sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face. And for the first time since childhood, she prayed with her whole body, her whole heart, her whole broken and beautiful soul. The music changed. The hymn remained, but now it was accompanied by something new, the sound of healing, of grace, of love that endures even when the beloved turns away. Miguel Santos hadn't slept properly since the burning. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the flames. Every time he opened them, he saw the accusation in his neighbors' faces. He'd tried to stop it, but not hard enough. He'd spoken up, but not loud enough. He'd stood apart, but not far enough away to avoid complicity. The weight of collective guilt pressed down on Wickfield like a physical thing. The town that had always pulled together in crisis was fracturing along lines of faith and doubt, tradition and progress, forgiveness and judgment. Some called for the students to be arrested. Others said it was just property damage, that people were overreacting. The divide ran through families, friendships, the very soul of the community. Miguel's grandmother, Elena Santos, had been one of the women who'd raised money for the original statue. At 93, she was the last living link to that sacred history, and watching her weep over the destruction was more than Miguel could bear. 2 weeks after the burning, on a grey Sunday morning when most of the town was either at church or sleeping off Saturday night, Miguel walked alone to Wickfield Square. The pedestal looked smaller in daylight, diminished by its emptiness. Someone had tried to clean off the soot, but ghostly stains remained, outlining where the statue had stood for nearly 7 decades. Flowers had been left, wilted roses, plastic carnations, hand-picked wildflowers from children who didn't understand why the pretty lady was gone. Miguel knelt on the cold concrete, something he hadn't done since he was a child dragged to Mass by his grandmother. The words came haltingly, rusty from disuse. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Not just for what they did, but for what I didn't do. I could have stopped it. I should have stopped it. I was afraid of being laughed at, afraid of standing out, afraid of being the weird religious kid. And because of my fear, your house was burned down." The wind picked up, scattering the dead leaves around the square in tiny whirlwinds. Miguel shivered and started to stand, but a weight on his shoulder stopped him. Not heavy, but warm. Too warm for the October morning. He turned slowly, heart hammering, and saw her. Not glowing, not floating, not surrounded by impossible light or accompanied by heavenly choirs. She stood beside him as simply and naturally as if she'd always been there, her blue robes moving gently in the wind, her face kind and infinitely sad. "You were quiet, but not silent," she said, her voice carrying the slight accent of his grandmother's generation, the sound of women who'd prayed in 2 languages and raised children in hope. That matters. Miguel's grandmother had always said that the Virgin Mary appeared to those who needed her most. But looking at her now, Miguel realized he'd had it backwards. She appeared to those who needed to serve her most. "What do I do?" he asked. She smiled, and for a moment the grey morning felt touched by spring. "What you've always done. You speak when others are silent. You stand when others kneel. You remember when others forget. But they won't listen to me. I'm nobody special. I'm not a priest or a leader or... You are Miguel Santos, great-grandson of Maria Santos, who led the prayers that saved Tommy Kowalski. You carry their faith in your blood and their courage in your heart. That makes you special enough." She began to fade, becoming translucent in the morning light, but her voice remained clear. "Tell them forgiveness is not about forgetting. Tell them mercy is not about avoiding consequences. Tell them love is not about being comfortable." And then she was gone, leaving only the warmth on his shoulder and a sense of purpose Miguel had never felt before. The changes in the 5 students did not go unnoticed. Amber had withdrawn completely from social life, emerging from her dorm only for classes and meals, walking through campus like a ghost. When she did speak, it was to apologize, to professors for assignments she'd never turned in late, to cafeteria workers for meals she'd never complained about, to fellow students for slights, both real and imagined. Liam had started attending daily Mass at St. Catherine's, the small Catholic church on the edge of campus. He'd never been religious before, but now he could be found in the back pew every morning at 7 a.m., clutching a rosary his grandmother had given him years ago, praying with the desperation of the truly haunted. Sierra had gone silent on all her social media platforms. Her last post, 2 weeks after the burning, was a simple text. "Some things are too important for words. Some mistakes require silence to truly understand." She'd enrolled in a theology class of all things, and could be found in the library reading books about comparative religion and the history of sacred spaces. Cody had donated all his streaming equipment to the campus media center and taken a job at a local homeless shelter. When asked about his sudden career change, he'd simply said, "I got tired of performing. I wanted to start serving." Jess had choreographed a piece called Restoration for her senior thesis, a wordless dance about destruction and redemption that left audiences in tears. She'd submitted it to festivals nationwide, not for fame or recognition, but because she believed art could heal what words could not. None of them spoke publicly about what they'd experienced. They couldn't have explained it even if they'd wanted to. How do you tell people that the statue you burned had visited you in dreams and visions? How do you confess to supernatural justice without sounding insane? But Miguel could see the change in them. could recognize the particular kind of brokenness that comes from encountering something infinitely greater than yourself. He'd felt it himself that morning in the square. 3 weeks after his encounter with the Virgin, Miguel did something he'd never imagined himself capable of. He called a meeting, not through official channels. The town council was still too divided. The university administration too worried about liability. Instead, he went door to door, the way his great-grandmother had when she'd organized the vigil for the trapped miners. He talked to the grieving Catholics and the angry secularists, to the students and the townspeople, to anyone who would listen. "We need to face this together," he told them. What happened in the square wasn't just about a statue or education funding or religious freedom. It was about us, about who we are when we think no one's watching, about what we do when we're angry and afraid. The meeting was held in the high school gymnasium, neutral ground that belonged neither to church nor campus. 67 people showed up, which was more than Miguel had dared hope for and fewer than the town needed. The 5 students sat in the front row, not by choice, but because Miguel had asked them to. They looked fragile in the harsh fluorescent light, nothing like the bold revolutionaries who'd live-streamed destruction just a month before. Miguel stood at the podium, his prepared speech crumpled in his sweating palm. Instead, he spoke from the heart. "I was there that night. I watched them burn the statue, and I didn't stop them. Not really. I said a few words, but I didn't put my body between them and the fire. I didn't call for help. I didn't do what my great-grandmother would have done, what any of the women who built that statue would have done. I was a coward. And because I was a coward, something sacred was lost. But maybe that loss can teach us something." He looked at the students, seeing his own shame reflected in their faces. They were angry about the education cuts. We're all angry about something, but anger without wisdom is just destruction, and destruction without consequence is just chaos. The room was silent, 67 people holding their breath. These 5 students have been living with the consequences of their choices for a month now. I can see it in them. They've been changed by what they did, in ways I don't think any of us can fully understand. The question is, what do we do with that change? An elderly woman in the 3rd row raised her hand. Miguel recognized her as Mrs. Kowalski, Tommy's widow. "What do you propose, young man?" Miguel took a deep breath. "I propose we rebuild. Not just the statue, but the community that was broken when it burned. I propose we let these students help with the rebuilding, not as punishment, but as healing. I propose we talk to each other instead of about each other. And I propose we remember that forgiveness isn't about pretending things never happened. It's about choosing to move forward together despite what happened." Murmurs rippled through the gymnasium. Some approving, some skeptical, all uncertain. It was Amber who stood first, her voice barely above a whisper. "I lit the fire. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to help rebuild what I destroyed. If you'll let me." One by one, the other 4 students stood. Liam offered to organize a fundraising drive. Sierra volunteered to document the rebuilding process, not for social media, but for the town archives. Cody said he'd coordinate with local artists and craftspeople. Jess proposed a dedication ceremony that would honor both the old statue and the new. The vote wasn't unanimous. Some people left without speaking. Others spoke without agreeing. But 51 of the 67 people present agreed to the rebuilding plan, and more importantly, they agreed to work together on it. It was a beginning. The new statue was not identical to the old one. It couldn't be. Maria Esperanza, the artist who'd carved the original, had died in 1987, and her techniques and materials were lost to time. But the town found another artist, David Reyes, a sculptor from the state capital who specialized in religious art and understood both the technical and spiritual challenges of the project. The fundraising took 4 months, not just from Wickfield, but from surrounding communities, from the university, even from strangers who'd heard the story and felt moved to contribute. The 5 students worked tirelessly, organizing bake sales and car washes, reaching out to local businesses, applying for grants from arts foundations and religious organizations. Amber discovered she had a talent for grant writing, spending hours crafting applications that told the story of destruction and redemption with a power that came from lived experience. Liam organized a benefit concert featuring local bands, managing logistics with an efficiency he'd never shown for anything else. Sierra interviewed community members, collecting oral histories about what the statue had meant to them, creating an archive of memory that would outlast any physical monument. Cody collaborated with David Reyes, documenting every stage of the creative process and learning about the spiritual significance of sacred art. Jess worked with the high school music and drama departments, developing a dedication ceremony that would honor the past while celebrating renewal. Miguel coordinated everything, becoming the bridge between old Wickfield and new, between the wounded and the healing, between the sacred and the secular. His grandmother, Elena Santos, became his unofficial advisor, sharing stories about the original statue that helped guide the recreation process. The new Virgin Mary was carved from the same Indiana limestone as her predecessor, but David Reyes incorporated elements that reflected the town's growth and diversity since 1954. Her robes bore subtle patterns inspired by the various cultures that now called Wickfield home. Her face, while maintaining the traditional features of Marian iconography, somehow seemed to reflect the faces of all the women who had prayed at her feet over the decades. But the most significant change was her hands. Instead of being outstretched in blessing, they were cupped, as if holding something precious, or perhaps offering to receive something broken, ready to make it whole. The dedication ceremony was held on Easter Sunday, exactly 1 year after the burning. The square was packed with people, not just from Wickfield, but from communities throughout the region. Local news crews covered the event, but respectfully, understanding that this was more than a simple statue unveiling. Father Martinez from St. Catherine's offered a blessing, but so did Pastor Williams from First Baptist, Rabbi Cohen from the Reform Temple in the next county, and Imam Hassan from the Islamic Center in the state capital. Miguel had insisted on interfaith participation, understanding that the new statue needed to belong to the whole community, not just its Catholic members. When the white cloth was removed, revealing the Virgin Mary in all her restored glory, the crowd fell silent. She was beautiful, more beautiful than the original somehow. The limestone seemed to glow in the spring sunlight, and her expression held both the tragedy of what had been lost and the joy of what had been found. But it was the 5 students who drew the most attention. They stood together at the base of the statue, transformed by their year of service and reflection. Amber had found her voice again. Not the angry shout of protest, but the quiet authority of someone who had learned to speak truth with humility. Liam's constant smell of gasoline had faded, replaced by the scent of the woodworking shop where he'd learned to craft crosses and religious art. Sierra's social media presence had returned, but now she used it to amplify voices of reconciliation and community healing. Cody's new videos documented acts of service and kindness, finding the miraculous in the mundane. Jess's dancing had evolved into something sacred, movement that told stories of redemption and grace. They each placed a single white rose at the statue's base, and as they did, Mrs. Kowalski stepped forward. At 89, Tommy's widow moved slowly, but her voice was strong. My husband saw her in the mine that day, saw her lead him to safety when everyone else was lost. I never doubted his story, not for 1 second. And I don't doubt that she's been here this whole year, working through all of you, healing what was broken. She looked directly at the 5 students. Tommy always said she didn't save him because he was perfect. She saved him because he was loved. Same with all of you. Same with all of us. As the crowd began to disperse, families and friends gathering around the base of the statue to leave flowers and light candles, Miguel noticed something that made his breath catch. There, in the limestone at the statue's feet, were marks that hadn't been there during the carving process. Marks that looked like water stains, as if tears had fallen on the stone and somehow been absorbed into its very structure. David Reyes saw them too, and when Miguel caught his eye, the artist simply nodded. Some things couldn't be explained, only accepted.